Welcome back, everyone. This video is going to be a pretty short one. We're going to talk about transport nodes. I know we've already kind of briefly touched on the topic before, but I'm going to show you a little stuff, or a few things rather, in this video that I haven't shown you yet, so it'll be a good one. So when we talked about the NSXT architecture, we talked about how we had these managers that deployed, and we also had this concept of transport nodes. And I said transport nodes were anything that is in the data plane that has been prepped for NSXT. So just to elaborate on that, what does prepped mean? Well, it depends on the type of transport node we're talking about. So if I start from the left with an ESXi host, prepping means we just go into NSXT Manager, select the node, and hit Configure NSX. It will then push what's called a VMware Installation Bundle, or a VIB for short, to the host, and that will enable this additional functionality, such as the ability to forward traffic on the overlay networks, the encapsulation of traffic with Geneve, and also some new command modes like NSX CLI. Now, the additional functionality that is gained there really applies pretty much equally to all of these other types of transport nodes, but the installation method will vary depending on what we're talking about. As an example, we can't push code directly from NSXT Manager to a bare metal server, but there is an agent that we can install on the bare metal server that will give us that same functionality. So the install process is a bit different. Since most cases are centered around vSphere, we're going to focus on that pretty heavily for this series. But I do want to also mention that we will be deploying an NSX Edge, which, if you recall, is the on-off ramp for everything to and from NSX. The reason I bring this up is that the Edge is a transport node on its own. It's considered an Edge transport node. But it's a little different because it's deployed as an appliance and it has all of those NSX bits built directly into it. So once we deploy this appliance, there's no additional configuration or installation that we need to do to get those bits working. So enough of me talking, let's actually show you guys what I'm talking about. So here I am in my lab. This is my NSXT Manager, and don't worry, we're going to go over everything you see here in a lot of detail and start from zero. But I just wanted to show you really quickly. So if I go to System, Fabric, then Nodes, I have this tab that opens up by default called Host Transport Nodes. Within this tab, I have two options. I have either selecting a vCenter, which I can have more than one vCenter. In my lab, I just have one. Or I can select Standalone Host. This is the equivalent of just KVM. If I was using Linux KVM as my virtualization solution, and I had VMs sitting on top of that, well, then I could select this and I would see those transport nodes there as well. In this case, I don't have KVM or anything like that, but I do have a couple of vSphere hosts. And I can see right here the version of vSphere, I have ESX 7.0, and the IP addresses are 254.11 and 254.12. And this information was imported because I went in here and earlier and I added a compute manager, which is also known as vCenter in NSXT, and that allowed me to import this inventory directly into NSXT Manager. So the key thing I want you to focus on here is where it says NSX configuration. The fact that it shows success means that it has been successfully prepped. In other words, that means that the VIBs were pushed successfully. And the way you do it is really easy. You just select it, you hit Configure NSX, and then you'll be prompted for some further information, and then it'll push the bits. And we're going to go through that. I've got a dedicated video just for that, so don't worry about the details too much right now. But if I expand this other cluster, these other hosts, you'll see that these are also ESXi 7.0, but they're not configured. So these two are technically not transport nodes. They're just available for me to configure as a transport node, is probably the best way to put it. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it here. We have 254.11 and 12. I want to prove to you that this host right here is successfully prepped as an NSX transport node. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to log into the host itself. I'm going to SSH to it. And I'm going to type my credentials. All right, so once we're in the host, we have a command that we can issue that will show us all of the installed VIBs, or VMware Installation Bundles. And that command is ESX CLI software VIB list. And I'm going to expand my screen because the output is pretty heavy. Now I hit enter and let's wait for it to come up. There it is. And you see right off the bat we have all these packages. These are VIBs that were installed, and they can be installed in a number of manners. You'll see here this is actually the whoever made that VIB, so it could actually even be a third party, which obviously these are all VMware. But the thing to focus on is these are all NSX VIBs. Just to give you an example, if you recall from my architecture video, I talked about how the NSXT Manager pushed configuration down to the host. Well, that's through this management plane agent. Keep in mind, we're on the host itself. So by installing this VIB specifically, it basically sits there and waits for communication from the NSXT manager. That's its whole job. And that's kind of the same story with some of these others. So for example, if I go up here and I say, I want to install NSX IDS, or rather, I want to configure it. I don't have it configured currently, but the VIB is already there. All I have to do is enable it. Likewise, I mentioned that some additional functionality is enabled when we prep a host or a transport node for NSXT. One of those is NSX CLI. If you've never logged into an ESX host, commands like ESX CLI, software VIB list are probably new to you, and that's totally fine. You don't need to know all of that. I just wanted to illustrate these VIBs being installed, but I do want to show you the NSX CLI very briefly. So if I type NSX CLI and hit enter, you'll see it drops me down to a different command mode. And if you recall from my control plane deep dive, I talked about how the get command will get you anywhere you need to go, or almost anywhere within reason. So if I now do a question mark, we see that I have all of these options: IDS, IP discovery, load balancer, logical router, logical switch. So I have all of these different options that are specific to NSXT, and I got these only because this host was prepped for NSXT. If I were to go and just remove this host or deconfigure it, I would lose all of that functionality. So that's all I have for you guys. I just wanted to get you comfortable with kind of what prepping the host means and what a transport node is and what makes it a transport node and all of that. So I think you should be good with it now. If you're not, drop something in the discussion board. I'd be happy to clear it up. But that being said, let's move on to the next video.